we're dedicating this session of learning to Lilu Nishmat Moreno Harav Mordechai Yisrael ben Baruch Meir and Moreno Aaron ben Mordechai Yisrael and David ben Shimon and Rav Aaron ben Avram Shmuel and also Levi, Rav Aaron ben Avram Shmuel Levi, and we're also wishing, we're dedicating this for the Hatzlacha of Ephraim Mordechai, and on the occasion of Mazel Tov, on the occasion of his daughter and future son-in-law, they should be zocheh to build a bayit ne'aman b'Yisrael.
Amen.
Okay, so the last piece we did was talking about the earth sprouting forth vegetation, and we noted a whole bunch of things, and we talked about how the earth deviated, and we questioned how the earth could even display that kind of sentience and choice, that kind of behavior. We talked about the discrepancies between what seemed to be the command that God gave the earth and what actually happened, because God said there should be an eitz pri oseh pri and a fruit tree bearing fruit, and what happened was the pasuk describes that it was an eitz oseh pri, that it was a regular tree that made fruit. We talked about that, and also the pasuk that talks about the commandment ends with the declaration of Vayehee Chayn, and it was so, yet the next pasuk immediately describes something a little bit different. And we talked about two different midrashim, two different approaches to explain how the earth deviated. Did she ultimately do something out of her concern that added to God's commandment, or ultimately lessened the commandment? But either way, she changed from, or rather interpreted what the commandment was. Okay, so we're left with the question that we didn't address yet. Why the pasuk says Vayehee Chayn, that it was so, if immediately afterwards the Torah qualifies that with several discrepancies, that it was not exactly the way God commanded. So what is the function of Vayehee Chayn? So this is the last piece on the first column of page 17, Yud Zayin. Okay? Umiklal ma'amarenu tshuva lasholim lama b'chamishi lo ne'amar Vayehee Chayn. So
I think we missed it.
we didn't get up to.
No, that's where we ended up here.
We're starting with Vazenavo?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to start a little. Okay. We're actually reading from the second to last paragraph on page 16. Okay? Uvazenavo el asher hikshenu, and now we will come to that which we had asked. Ki ech yomar Vayehee Chayn, how can the verse state, and it was so, v'lo chen haya, when it reports that indeed it was not so? Ki halo avra, did the earth not go over the will of God, meaning not heed, ohosifo, or even if she added, leman damar, depending on which midrash you learn like, meaning either way, she deviated. V'gam ra'oi lashit lev, and it's also important to take note, ki gam amru Vayehee Chayn hu miyutar, and also just the words, and it was so, are extra. Ki me'elav noda shehaya chayn, because we would assume if God said something, right, we know that that's how it is. So why does it have to report Vayehee Chayn? What's the function of that? Ki al kain, right? B'ma'amar yikavu amayim. We know that on the second day, on the third day, when it says that the waters should gather, they should congregate. Lo ne'amar Vayehee Chayn. It doesn't say over there. It doesn't say all the time. Every time that God asks for something to happen, it does not report afterwards. And it was so. It's not a consistent feature. Ach lidat Rabbi Yehuda, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, kivein hu yitbarach lomar, God intended, when he said that, to say, halo tiru kein titma'u, behold, you will see and you will wonder, ech tzivisi, how could I command, shegam ha'etz yeh na'achal, v'lo haya chayn? You would ask, how can it be that I commanded that even the tree part of the fruit-bearing tree should be edible, and it was not so? Lazani Magid, that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu is interjecting in the story, Ki Vayehee Chayn, and it is so. V'lo haya hadavar levatala. Meaning, somehow, even if there is a deviation ultimately in what's expressed from the earth, vis-a-vis the commandment was not in vain, and on the level of commandment, somehow it retains that reality. On the level of potential. V'hu kamosha amrizal, and it's like the words of our sages, im bayom hashlishi, if on the third day, tziva Hashem tachei ha'aretz, so God said that the earth should sprout vegetation, etc. Ech bayom hashishi hu omer, how could it say on the sixth day, v'choch siach hasadeh terem yiyeh? Because it describes on the sixth day that all the vegetation of the field did not come forth yet. It didn't sprout yet. And yet the commandment was on the third day. So how can it say Vayehee Chayn, and it was so, and describe what happened on the third day, and yet the Torah reports on the sixth day that even if it was all present, it did not come out of the earth. Ad she'ed ala min haaretz, until a cloud or vapor exited from the earth, v'nivra Adam, and man was made. Ve'az yatzu kol esav v'chol eitz, meaning the vegetation waited for Adam to be created before it sprouted forth. Ach amru rabbeinu zal, nevertheless our rabbis said, Ki hakol nivra b'mtziut shalem, everything was made with a complete existence. Ela she'amdu al pesach hakarka, they stood at the opening of the earth. Ad yom hashishi, they were all there and just waiting for attention to sprout just under the surface. Ve'az yatzu lachutz, and then they came out. Ubazen navo alei inyan, and with that we will come to the matter at hand. Besum leiv al shinoi halashon, when you focus on the difference in the language. Kihu yitbarach amar, God said, Tadshe, it should sprout. V'achakach eno omer vatad she'aretz, and you'll see that the next pasuk does not say, and it sprouted, ki im vatotse, but rather that it released. Meaning something emerged from the creation of earth, meaning earth was a being, and something came from that on the level of Yitziyah, but it still did not sprout forth physically to fulfill the words Tadshe. That only occurs on the sixth day. Tadshe, etc. Ahu, ki ba'amro yitbarach, when God did indeed say, when He commanded Tadshe, that it should sprout forth, kach nivra hakol b'mtziut shalem, that's indeed how everything, meaning the description of the reality in the commandment is indeed what happened. She'afilo ha'etz haya bar achila, and on that level, even the tree was edible. V'al zeh namar vayehee chayn, and the Torah reports that on that level, indeed was so. Ki chayn hayu miyom shlishi ad yom hashishi, because from the commandment on the third day till finally when it sprouted forth on the sixth day after the creation of Adam, it was indeed like that. Al petach hakarka, underneath the opening of the earth. However, hashinoi, the deviation that's reported in the next pasuk, lo haya, it did not occur, rak b'yetziah lachutz bashishi, only when all this vegetation eventually came forth and sprouted on the sixth day. And that's why at this point it says vatotze haaretz. What the earth did was it released, meaning what came up out of the ground. Not on the level of the creation of Tadshe, that it should sprout. On the level of sprouting, it indeed was exactly like God said. But finally, somehow, when it came up through the earth, on the sixth day, it did not look the same. Ki az avra, that's the moment when the earth went over or violated what God had instructed, and only then that original Eitz Pri Osepri became only a regular tree, Eitz Osepri, that bears fruit.
Is it suggesting that it was Adam's creation that caused it to deviate?
No. The linking to Adam's creation is as follows. There's 2 points there. The point is that the mud that made Adam came from a vapor that came out of the earth. And that vapor somehow, when it came out of the earth for the creation of Adam, that's when it facilitated the sprouting forth, or actually the exiting of these sprouts. Meaning it coincided with that vapor, ve'ed ya'alim in arts. And Chazal talk about it, that really Adam Arishon had to, even though all of creation was waiting, it already existed, Adam Arishon had to come into a state beforehand so he would ask for rain. So that's why there's a delay. Meaning on the level of the development of creation, its place belongs on the third day. It's a manifestation of the concept of the third day. But in terms of finally coming forth and appearing, that has to do with the awareness of and the perception of man.
But then it means to say that the Vayehee was correct, because at the third day...
From the third day to the sixth day, indeed, that's what was underground.
Uh-huh.
So it was somehow when it changed at that moment. Okay? Which means also it links the power of deviation of the earth closer to Adam Arishon.
Right.
Okay. Uledat Rabbi Pinchas, that was according to Rabbi Yehuda. And according to Rabbi Pinchas, Vayehee Chayn, what does it mean, Vayehee Chayn? Lomar, that is to say, Mashitziviti ken hayat tamid, that which I commanded was always this way. She'ilane srak, that trees that are used for shade or for lumber, right? Lo hayu bahen perot, they did not have fruits. Zulati be'et ha'otzah la'olam, except for at the moment when they came up from the earth on the sixth day. Ki az vatotzei ha'aretz. V'lo nitkayem ki im l'sha'a, and it only lasted for a moment. Ad shechata Adam, until Adam sinned. Ki az laku perot ha'ilam, because as a result of Adam's sin, the fruits of the trees were cursed. Shehu me'ashisha dvarim shelaku becheto, that is enumerated in a list of 6 things that got cursed because of his sin. Kanodem mirabotenu zal, as is reported by our sages. Okay, so the curse?
They talk about now the trees that are for shades and lumber.
Yeah.
They never intended to be fruit, right?
According to, so there's 2 pshatim that we talked about last time, right? One is that the earth, that God intended that the fruit trees should also be, that the trees themselves should be edible, and they were not. And the other one is that God said that only fruit-bearing trees should bear fruit, but when the earth released the trees, regular trees that were not meant to bear fruit also bore fruit. So according to that pshat, where it added, and it didn't do what God said because it added, that was only for the moment when they came up. But after Adam sinned, they went back to not bearing fruit anyway. Okay? So we have just noted how we've explained how Vayehee Chayn can be appropriate here. But generally speaking, right, we still, meaning maybe there's a function to Vayehee Chayn in general when it appears and when it doesn't. V'hine, let's just finish off this idea of the trees. V'hine derech zeh shechiyuniyut haya az ba'aretz kamdubar. And according to this approach that we talked about, that there was a level of vitality, of essential life force that was latent in the earth, like we mentioned. Hu emet etzli. I gotta tell you, I believe it 100%. It's the truth. That's what he says. Ach lamas mi'ilim bo. But those who challenge that, who don't believe me, leimar, and they say ki haaretz chamritzi, that the earth is just coarse materiality. Ve'echa ta'avor bateva, and how can it go against its nature? Yiyeh, it must be kikara la ka'asher yikra lelev ha'adam ba'adam. What happened to her is what happens in the heart of a man. Ki im shehalev chamri. The heart also is a physical organ. It serves a purpose for physical mechanics. However, Natan Hashem chachma b'tivo. Hashem programmed it. He placed wisdom in its nature, lechalek dam lechol ha'evarim, to send forth and apportion blood to all the different limbs of the body. Lechol ever lefi hachanat tivo, to each limb according to how what it requires, according to its nature. Umivchar hadam, and the choicest of the blood that's available, ma'akev la'atzmo, it holds back for itself. Kein natan Hashem koach ba'aretz. So that is how God invested this power in the earth. Lahotzi mehashefa hamasurla, to release from the divine influx which was given over to her, chutza, externally, bishofa mehanishpa ba, in order to continually flow out from her that which flowed into her, bekoch bli psolet, with an ability that does not have waste. V'hi ikva hamuvchar la'atzma, and she held back the choicest for herself. Kasher ya'aseh lev ha'adam ba'adam, just like the heart of a man does in a man. So what we're arguing here is that even if you want to say that the earth doesn't have a mind of its own, how it behaved can be described through the same phenomenon as the physical organ of the heart, which behaves the same way. Shema'akev la'atzmo mivchar hadam, that holds back for itself the choicest of the blood. Uma gam az shenitan koach ba'aretz lohotzi mibli zera ilanot d'shayim, and also, that's this idea that there is a power, an energy within the earth to release all kinds of seeds and trees and vegetation without any sort of starting seed, right? There were no seeds. It doesn't say God created seeds. It would be impossible for the earth to do this without some sort of quality, very, very refined quality of vitality on the level of something. And this is an approach to understand the opinion of Rabbi Pinchas. Okay. So now, in the description of the fifth day, it does not say Vayehee Chayn. Umiklal ma'amarenu, and from the general rule of what we've said, tshuva lasholem, we have an answer to those that ask, Lama b'chamishi lo ne'amar Vayehee Chayn, how come the Torah does not say, and it was so over the course of the fifth day? V'hu, and that is because ki adarabba, just the opposite. Haro'ui haya shelo lemor b'shum davar. Really, it would have been correct not to write Vayehee Chayn anywhere. It would be completely inappropriate to, you would think, meaning Vayehee Chayn is entirely superfluous. Wow, somebody upstairs really approves of our learning. That was a love tap from God. That was a postcard with a kiss. Okay, the Torah should be sweet. Okay, so really, people pose the question, how come Vayehee Chayn is conspicuously omitted in the fifth day? And the Alshech HaKadosh counters, well, really, it shouldn't have said it anywhere. Vayehee Chayn is entirely superfluous. Why? Because ki mi lo yodea ki chayn haya. Who don't know that that's exactly how it be? However, b'mkomot shenichtav, where it is indeed stated specifically, haya litzorech, it's there to serve a particular function. Be'inyan ha'ilanot ne'amar, in regards to the trees, when it says Vayehee Chayn, like in our example in the third day, kasher katavnu, it's like we wrote, lemar kedi itlei, lemar kedi itlei, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, or according to the opinion of Rabbi Pinchas. Uvayom hasheni, and when it says Vayehee Chayn on the second day, that is in response to Vayavdel ben hamayim mi'al harakia, right? Lamayim mitachad harakia. So it says that God separated from the waters above the firmament and the waters below. Why does it say over there specifically Vayehee Chayn, and it was so? Amru Rabotenu Zal, our sages tell us, she'ein bein mayim elyonim letachtonim ela kimalei nima. There is really nothing separating. There's no space between the upper waters or the lower waters at that stage, except for the width of a hair, a tiny string, a thread. V'al kain, and therefore haya makom lachshov, there is room to think. Shelo nitkayem ha'avdel, that when God said that they should be separated, really there is no separation, meaning they're just separated by the length of a thread. Lezeh amar, therefore the pasuk attests. Da, you should know, ki Vayehee Chayn, that is the fulfillment of what God intended. Ki yesh ha'avdel vaday, there certainly is a separation. Gam ki ma'adu, even if it is ever so slight. Uba amro yikavu hamayim, and when the verse says that God said the waters should gather together, Shamru Rabbeinu Zal, that our master said, yikavu li, they should, yikavu doesn't just mean that they should congregate, but it comes from the word of tikva. They should look forward, they should hope. He says, look to me, anticipate to me, wait for the signal, mashani atid la'asot behem, for what I'm going to ultimately do with these waters. Shehu, that it is. He's referring to ki tenai hitna kadosh baruch hu imayam, that in the creation of the ocean, God made a condition. He created it conditionally. She'im lo chayn, that if it does not comply with God's condition, lo hayahu yitbarach meshaneh hateva sheitbia, he would not change the nature that he put into it. Meaning, he's creating water now with a particular nature, and yet he wants the water to go over its nature by kriyat yam suf, and he wants the water to split and defy its normal programming. And the only way to do that is upon its inception, upon its creation, to put this proviso in the programming so that it can ultimately do that. So over here, the reference of Vayehee Chayn, V'zeh yomar, this will say, Hineni matneh ve'omer, I am currently making a condition and stating, Yikavu li hamayim, that the waters must look to me. Vayedei chayn, meaning to when I tell them that they have to split. Vayedei chayn, And through this, Vayehee Chayn b'kriyat Yam Suf. So Vayehee Chayn, when it talks about the waters gathering, is really talking about that the waters should look to God for a later event where they go against their nature. Vayehee Chayn, and it was so, meaning indeed that ultimately was made capable of coming to fruition. Okay. And it finally manifested at the splitting of the Reed Sea. She'im lo chen, for if it was not so, lo haya mishaneh hateva, it would not be able, if this did not happen conditionally at its creation, lo haya mishaneh hateva, it would not be able to change its nature later on. V'chein bayom ha'revi'i, and so too on the fourth day. Achar amro, after it says, shebara shnei maorot gedolim, the pasuk, the verse says that God created the two great luminaries, Kama, the big one, to rule during the day, and the small one to rule at night. The same verse. The first half of the verse says the two great ones, and then the verse continues and says the big one and the small one. So, halo neged einecha, is it not before your very eyes? Echad gadol ve'echad katan, that one is big and one is small. Va'katan mikabel min hashemesh, and the small one, it receives its light from the sun. Al kein amar, therefore it says, the verse continues, v'hayu lima'orot, and they will be for luminaries, kilomar, that is to say, bilti tzarich lekabel den midain, that they should have the ability to autonomously illuminate without receiving from each other. Ki da, you should know, ki vayehee chayn, it was so, bishivoy echad achar hibaram, that initially, before they were demoted to the relationship that they had with a greater one and a smaller one, they were initially shnei me'oros hagdolos, that they ma'oros gedolim, that had autonomous, both of them had autonomous ability to illuminate. Va'al titma, and don't wonder now, birot echad gadol echad katan, that you see that one is primary and one is secondary because it receives and reflects. Ki achar shevayas Elohim et shnei ha'marot hagdolim, after indeed God made it that way that they are two great luminaries, eira shinoi, there occurred a change. Ki hayam ma'or gadol ma'or katan, that ultimately became one large luminary and one small one. Shehu ayidei akitru kanoda, and that was because of the antagonism as is known. Hine ki b'shloshet hayamim, these 3 days all have examples. Hutzrach lomar vayehee chayn, it was necessary to specifically write that it was so, whereas normally we would have no need to point that out. Ach b'chamishi, however, on Thursday, on the 5th day of creation, shelo hutzrach lomro, there is no specific need to convince the reader that it indeed conformed to the will of God, and therefore lo ne'amar, it does not say.
It's interesting that on the Yom HaChamishi there was a shinoi on the same day, whereas what we're saying in the
What
third,
was the shinoi on Yom Chamishi?
with the two luminaries.
That was on the fourth day.
Sorry, the fourth day there was a shinoi on the same day.
You're saying that the shinoi on Yom Shlishi didn't occur to the 6th day.
Right.
And okay,
And we
Shlishi
still have
and I'm sorry, and Yom Sheni, the Vayehee Chayn doesn't come to roost till a good many years later.
Yep.
Okay, and you're saying that specifically on Bayom Revi'i, it's attesting to something that's occurring specifically over there.
Yep.
Okay, that's a good point. So you see that Vayehee Chayn is used in all these places to say that where there is room for the reader to question if it indeed did come to roost that way, so the Torah has to be emphatic and assert that it indeed did. Okay. All right, there's a little non-piece over here. It's a
So can I
non-piece.
just ask one
Yeah.
question? We understood Vayehee Chayn on the 3rd day with this grass, because we said between the 3rd day and the 6th day it was Chayn. But how can we understand on the fourth day, the sun and the moon? How can we understand Vayehee Chayn if on the same day it wasn't so?
So it seems to me that we're saying the same exact thing on the 4th day and on the 3rd day, except that what happens on the 3rd day is separated by time. Meaning it's okay that it changed. Meaning what we're saying on the 4th day is that still the pasuk is attesting that there was a moment in creation where they did appear that way.
I see.
But then the demotion happened already after they were formed.
Okay.
Yeah. Meaning he's saying exactly God did create them that way, and that's why probably they can return to that. It's a fulfillment of their tikkun ultimately when you have yom shekulo yom shelo yom velo laila, right? Or hayom ke Or chama k'or havana, that the light of the moon will be like the light of the sun, meaning that it will be autonomous. There won't be a miut alvana. That's because it was essentially created that way.
But we also have the problem. But Vayehee means that it should be that case all the time. So how can we have Vayehee and then we have a deviation?
So I think this is exactly what we're saying. You know where you see this? You see this by male and female. Meaning at the moment, we can get into it. Okay, at the moment on Yom Revi'i, when that happened, that didn't just affect the sun and the moon and the luminaries, it affected the cosmological male and female. So that when it comes to Adam and Chava, who are man and woman, who personify through the human form the cosmic force of masculine and feminine, when there's a chet there, there's a breakdown there, and that finally expresses itself there. And the demotion of woman is a direct result. So just like we say that ultimately woman will be restored, that's because it's a fulfillment of her potential the way she was intended, right? And that could never have been if she didn't come out fully fashioned like that initially. So the same thing we're saying by the sun and the moon, that they did come out fully formed like that, and they did have a moment before they started quabbling, right, where they were like that, and that allows, even in a later demoted form, for it to be a latent potential that it can come back and be mitake. I think that answers your question for me. Okay? So what do I mean by a non-piece here? Here we just have a little note that on matters that are so important to us, as we just started talking about, the Alshech HaKadosh wrote about it somewhere else. So good luck. That's what he says. Here it says, Vayomer Elokim Yehi Ma'orot. That whole story with the sun and the moon. Hine chamisha ketuvim elu. These 5 verses. Hinam ketuvim b'mei sha'arim b'shar hamazalot. They're written up in the book 100 Gates, in the gate of the constellations. V'lo ra'iti la'atikam po, and I didn't see fitting to copy them out here. Lahavat hakitzur, for the love of brevity.
Do we have copies of that?
I searched and I could not find anywhere on the internet where it even has note of this book. There are all kinds of books called Mea Sha'arim by different people. I did not find one from the Alshech. I don't know what he's referring to. Somebody please help us. I'll be more than happy to do it inside. I would really, really, really like to. This is a public service announcement and a call to anybody outside who can do some research and find us the book Mea Sha'arim, that includes within it a chapter called Shar HaMazalot, that was possibly a contemporary of the Alshech HaKodesh who predates him, that talks about the great luminaries. I would love to see that and to learn that together. Okay. Okay, so now, do we have time to do another piece or start another piece? Shabbat. Okay. Okay. Yes. Sorry?
Why did the luminaries fall big?
Yeah. So originally HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the Shemesh and the Yareach that they should both be like the sun. They should both have their own light. And indeed, the pasuk says the 2 great lights. But then in the same pasuk, it says the big one to be in charge of the day and the small one to be at night. The same pasuk just said the 2 big ones, and then it says the big one and the small one. Does it mean relative to each other? No. The sun and the moon. So the Midrash says that originally they were the same, but the moon that we know today is a diminished version because she said, why would we both be the same and share a 24-hour period? What's the point? So Hashem says, if that's how you feel, then you got to do something about it. And she couldn't make herself bigger than the sun, and she couldn't make the sun smaller than her, so she had to make herself small. But that only happened after God created them with initially to both be that the male and female, but equal.
And then from Mashiach, it will come back to the same.
Just like the Navi Hosea says that Am Yisrael will not call God Ba'ali anymore, but Ishi, not my husband, but my man, my male counterpart. It's a higher level of union. That the woman, essentially, the Nekeva, the receiving part of creation, will be upgraded, that there will be no difference, as Judah will tell you soon, between male and female and giving and receiving in the same act. Right, Judah?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, Rabbi.
Okay. Okay.